Europe is doing the right geopolitical thing, a deal with Mercosur. I won't have issue with what the European Parliament decided on that yesterday, but nevertheless, moving on. Or a free trade agreement with India. So you're going to start seeing Europe and other players. So this is in very many ways, I believe it is Europe's moment. And you're going to start seeing that. And I think we can cope with it fairly well.
In summary, you could say that the big argument is that for us, this is the 1918, 1945 or 1989 moment of our generation. It's a moment when the world order balance and dynamics are changing. Sometimes they happen after wars, like after World War I, World War II, or sometimes after periods such as the Cold War. And we're sort of somewhere in between. And we know that orders usually last, or at least have in the past century, 20 years as they did after World War I, 40 years as it did after World War II, or 30 years as it did after the Cold War. And what initiated the change in the current liberal world order, I would argue, was Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. So we're talking February 2022. I fully realize that this is a rather Western perspective of looking at things, but I admit fully in the book as well that my identity is Finnish, Nordic, European, transatlantic. So I look at my analysis looks a lot through that lens. And of course, it has now been accelerated, this change and transformation with the new US administration. And the triangle of power for me is the global West, which used to be led, at least by the United States, trying to preserve the current liberal order. The global East, led by China, which was more supporting multipolarity and a new order. And then the global South, which unfairly I lump 125 countries into, but for me, that is the area and entities of the world that will actually decide what the next order looks like. And of course, now things move quite fast. I think the thesis still holds, but my big idea is that you kind of have a choice, which is fairly binary, but probably it's gonna land somewhere in between. You have those who support multipolarity, which is about transaction and deals and actually spheres of interest, so not far from what we saw in the 19th century. And then you have those who support multilateralism, which is about international institutions, it's about rule of law, it's about norms, and basically the liberal world order that existed. And my final point, if we want to preserve the liberal world order, we need to give agency to those countries around the world which feel that the current order was built 80 years ago in the image of the West and especially the United States. So give more power to the rest of the world, because I still think that there are more multilateralists in this world than there are transactionalists. So this is the big idea of the book, and in many ways a defense of the liberal world order and of course of open societies as well. Then you have to ask yourself the question, okay, how do you do this? Well, a good starting point in my mind is another instrument I try to outline there, which is dignified foreign policy, because I feel that, we have a lot of conversation about history, about a post-colonial world, about colonialism, and we always look back into history for examples on how we have been treated. So my take, and of course I come from a rather inoffensive country with a limited colonial past, which means that it gives me kind of street cred to do that. So I talk about dignified foreign policy. In other words, you have to behave towards the people that you want to work with in a respectable way, which seems to be lacking a little bit in the world right now as well, I have to admit. I do think that the pressure that we are now seeing coming from the United States and also coming from Russia will actually lead to deeper integration, probably more strategic autonomy or whatever you want to call it, and however you want to define it, and also to an enlarged Europe. But there's another thing that it will lead to, and that is Europe looking also elsewhere. So we're kind of hedging or de-risking a little bit, like Mark Carney said in his speech. Canada is 70% dependent on trade with the US. We are not in that situation. But we used to talk about de-risking from China.
I don't hear that too much anymore, if you know what I'm saying. We're talking about de-risking elsewhere, which is an interesting phenomenon in all of this. And I think, Europe is doing the right geopolitical thing, a deal with Mercosur. I won't have issue with what the European Parliament decided on that yesterday, but nevertheless, moving on. Or a free trade agreement with India. So you're going to start seeing Europe and other players. So this is in very many ways, I believe it is Europe's moment. And you are going to start seeing that. And I think we can cope with it fairly well. And just one final point. Europe used to be considered to be slow and legislative and bureaucratic and regulatory, way too stable. And right now, people are looking for stability. So I actually think that a lot of investment will start coming into Europe as well. I mean, I'm talking about the EU-US thing. So I'm actually quite optimistic about the future of Europe because of COVID, because of Ukraine, because of energy, because of the US.